everybody. Welcome to Azure Flash News. We
Ah.
are back.
After a considerable hiatus,
Yes, and I am Mark Carter.
I'm Matt Lunzer.
and I am Rick Weinberg, and it's great to
We
be
are
back.
the
Three.
We are really ready for CSA.
Yes, we are absolutely.
Back after how long?
It literally, I felt like it was like a year and a half, 2 year hiatus. I mean, it's been ridiculously crazy. It feels like 10 years, even though it's probably been like 10 minutes. But you know, and the good news is a lot has changed, right? Over since the last time we talked, I think the last literally YouTube video we put out probably was APIM and App Gateway, like peanut butter and jelly, right? It was that long ago that we were talking about that. So we've got some good stuff to talk about today. I'm going to be covering off on dangling DNS issues and how you can actually protect yourself from URL hijacking in Azure. And Matt?
I'm going to cover off on Azure Savings Plan.
Awesome. Awesome.
Saving money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel drawn. And this isn't necessarily a security thing.
Yeah.
It's like when people use DNS as like a load balancing solution, like point here, point there.
Robin.
Yeah, and as we all know, is if your upstream DNS servers don't honor that TTL, it doesn't help. So anyway, having said that, let's jump right in. So I have a resource group that's dedicated entirely to DNS. So if we can flip the screen here, thank you. So what you see I've provisioned some resources. And the first thing that I've done is I have a static web app called DNS Static. And this is just purely out there, so I've got something to display, okay? But one thing you'll notice is the actual FQDN that's provided by Microsoft is something akin to like Happy Smoke Dash, and you can see kind of this little link down here. That's my actual YAML file for my workflow for my action in GitHub. But what I've done is I've actually we'll call it a vanity URL,
Sure.
right? Because a lot of times I'm vain. You're so vain. I know that oh gosh, here we go. Yeah, amen. So typically you don't want people going to, whatever .azurewebsites.net. You want them to go to a user-friendly URL. Yeah, exactly, right? So what people unfortunately don't always do, though, is they don't realize that, as these websites can be ephemeral, as things can get re-provisioned via CI/CD pipelines, those URLs can kind of go away for a little while, right? And if you're not careful, somebody could be keeping an eye on that. And it's actually not that hard to keep an eye on if you know what to do. So if you do something as simple as an NS lookup, in this case you don't see the aliases because I've set this up correctly. But the alias is www.rickweinberg.com, and you can see it's pointing to web.rickweinberginternal.com with an address of 20.106.29.135. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What you don't see is that happy smoke dash that URL. So if I go ahead and I select this, whoops, I went the wrong way there, so we're good. Where's my blade? It's because of my screen resolution. So basically what you're not seeing is the actual, this whole, just trust me when I say this happy smoke thing is actually the base URL. In fact, if I click on this particular link, it's going to bring up a web password protected site, which is, I just set it that way in the static app and it's done. But if I click on this link, you can see here's the actual FQDN for that Azure Static Web App. Okay. Now, if I just pointed www.rickweinberg.com, if I created a scene name record, and I just pointed that to that happy smoke splat Azure Static Apps.net, what happens is if I did that NS lookup, you would see that.
Right.
And so now people monitor that URL and they keep an eye on it. And if all of a sudden they know that they try to ping it or whatever they're doing and it's non-resolvable, it's gone and they can go steal it. So now www.rickweinberg.com is pointing to potentially a nefarious actor, right?
Not you.
Not me. Not something that I'm hosted, right? Exactly. So what I've done is I've actually used Azure Private DNS, right? So a private zone, to create web.rickweinberginternal.com. So I actually just have rickweinberginternal.com, and that's my Azure private zone. And I created an A record. But what I didn't do was I didn't actually point to an alias. So when I created this A record for web.rickweinberginternal.com, it points to this IP address, okay, 20.106.20, which I showed in the NS lookup, right? So when you do that NS lookup, you don't see this happy smoke. You don't see that happy smoke Azure Static Web Apps.net. What you see is it resolves to an IP address, which is web.rickweinberginternal.com. because it's not an alias. So that's a great way to protect you. So if I were to take this offline or delete it and then reprovision it, it's kind of hidden from the end users in terms of what that www.rickweinberg.com is resolving to. So very simple to set up. You can see if I go back to my DNS, I have my static web app, which is what I'm using, like I said, just as a placeholder so that people can see it. I have rickweinberg.com, which is the app service domain, and then the DNS zone. So if we look at the DNS zone for rickweinberg.com, you should be able to see this pointer. So you can see I have a CNAME rec. I didn't need to keep my TTLs to 300, but for testing purposes, I kept the time to expire short.
Yep.
Time to live, TTL.
Right.
But what you see is this is pointing to web.rickweinberginternal.com. Okay. So if we go back, so if I go back to my DNS research group, if we go to rickweinberginternal.com, you'll see that I have a web, and it's an AREC, it's not a CNAME rec, and it's just pointing to this IP address. This IP address happens to be the IP address of my static web app that I provisioned. Okay. So in a nutshell, if we go, and if you're interested, well, unfortunately it's password protected. But at the end of the day, the nice thing about that is I do it, and I could remove that effectively. If you go to www.rickweinberg.com, what I'll do is I'll take that out, so that password protection out, so you can go to the site. Because what I've done, in addition to creating this setup, is if I go to that link again and I'll submit, you can see I actually kind of documented what I've done. So here are the best practices: Azure App Service Domains, which is how I created rickweinberginternal.com. I'm sorry, rickweinberg.com. The private Azure Private DNS, which is how I created that intermediary, if you will, right? That DNS zone. And then, of course, here's a link to Dangling DNS exploits and how to handle them. In addition to that, there are some capabilities in Azure Defender for App Services that actually looks for this situation. So you can see it's not brand new, February 9th, 2021. It is something that we've introduced so that you can see what's happening and avoid this whole concept of a subdomain takeover, which is effectively what we described. So these are great resources. Highly recommend, if you're not doing this today, please do it, because I would really hate to go to contoso.com and find out it's been taken over by somebody who is putting stuff up there that probably you don't want to be represented by. Let's just say that. So yeah, I mean, super straightforward to provision, very easy to get enabled. The only thing that I found does take a little bit of time is when you create some of those first URLs. There's you have to have that TXT kind of secret code, if you will, it's almost like a token, because you're proving that you own this URL and that you have access to create this entry. So that's the only thing that I found, and it only seems to take a lot of time on the first implementation. After that, it's pretty quick to create subsequent URLs and subdomains. So yeah, like I said, if you're not doing this today, if you're not protecting, defending against subdomain takeovers, at a minimum, make sure you're using Azure Defender for App Service. But I also recommend hardening your solution by creating that private zone intermediary so that people don't even know that you're using that subdomain. Awesome. Cool.
That's great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
Taking time to walk us through that. And so now we're going to take a minute and talk about
The Azure Savings Plan.
Azure Savings Plan.
Yeah.
Right? Who doesn't like saving money?
Hey, you
I
know my mantra, right? Exploit the cloud. That's the last step, right? Always.
So with that as kind of a backdrop, so we know that in current state, kind of the macroeconomic headwinds that exist, there's a lot of companies that are looking for ways to either save money or make their cloud infrastructure more cost efficient.
Absolutely.
Okay? So with that said, we've got ways to save money that have existed for a long time. So we've got hybrid use benefits. So if you're looking to save money on software in Azure, you can use existing licensing investments and save money on paying for that software when it runs in Azure. We call that Azure hybrid use benefit. That's been around for a long time. We pivot away from software and we start to look at infrastructure savings. Historically, we've had the reserved instance pricing, where you can choose a duration, 1 to 3 years, a region, and a particular VM SKU. And by making that commitment, you get a discount in return.
So when you talk about reserved instances, you'll likely hear us refer to that as RIs.
RIs. RIs for short. A lot of people call them RIs. And that's kind of maybe what they're known as in the industry. And then we have this weird kind of nuanced thing that some people know about called spot instances, where we have this hardware that's sitting idle that you can actually deploy and use for interruptible workloads. And you get a great discount on that. And in the event that we need that hardware back, we evict that virtual machine. It goes back into our pool, and basically it gets reclaimed. But that's another way to save money. So you can think about software, hybrid use benefit, reserved instances or RIs that have been around a long time, and spot instances, taking unused hardware and getting a great discount in return. Well, there's been this new offering that's come to market. We call it the Azure Savings Plan. We just announced it at Ignite. And the Azure Savings Plan is a lot like reserved instances, but it's without the rigidity. So if you think about an Azure Savings Plan, and we're kind of showing the way that this looks on the screen, what you'll notice is we've got, in this case, a virtual machine showing on the screen, a D2 V3. Now, with pay-as-you-go pricing, you're going to pay, let's say, $150 a month. That's kind of the price shows. However, if you want to purchase an Azure Savings Plan, and go ahead and click that radio button for 1 year, what you'll notice is that the price drops. Now, what's the difference between a savings plan and an RI? This is really what's important.
Yeah, this is critical.
The savings plan is different in that the savings plan still requires you to commit to 1 or 3 years, just like a reserved instance does. But the big difference is with the savings plan is you don't have to choose the region in which you purchase the savings plan, which you do with a reserved instance, and you don't have to choose the specific VM SKU like you have to with a reserved instance.
Oh, interesting.
So it gives you a lot of freedom that you didn't get with reserved instance pricing. So basically, choose the term.
Yep.
Choose
like 57% myself.
57%.
I'm a fan of that.
And all you have to do is choose a scope. Do you want to do it at your enrollment? Do you want to do it at a management group level? Do you want to do it at a subscription level or a resource group level?
Okay.
And that's it. Once you make that decision and you make that commitment, resource manager will just basically apply and bind those savings in the most cost-efficient manner possible.
Oh, so that's amazing. So it's kind of like, so it's almost like having a prepaid gas card.
Yeah, it kind
You're
of
not
is.
saying I've got to use this pump. You're not saying I've got to use this station. You're not even saying I've got to use this car.
Right.
What you're saying is I've got this savings plan that I've developed, and where that money goes, that's up to you as a customer.
I put money on this card. I can go to any gas station. I can choose any gas type. I can use it without any rigidity whatsoever. Reserved instances have some rigidity, right?
Yes.
You had to choose a region. You had to choose a VM SKU. With savings plans, you don't have to do that. Now, what I will say is that a savings plan doesn't necessarily give you as great of discounts as reserved instances. So something to be aware of is that you will get a bigger bang for your buck with reserved instances. But the balance of trade is that reserved instances are a bit more rigid. You have to choose the region. You have to choose the VM SKU. Savings plans do away with all of that. So if you really want discounting, which who doesn't want that, but you don't want to have to manage necessarily the discount application, savings plans could be the right fit for you.
So it looks like if you combine an Azure Savings Plan with Azure Hybrid Use Benefit, which we've talked about, I think, on a prior show, you can see, actually, if I scroll up here, it makes it a little easier to see. That cost, so if I click on the license included, is $104.21 a month, right? If I select the Azure Hybrid Use Benefit, in addition to that discount, it's $37.
Right.
That's crazy a month. That's crazy.
Right. So this is a way to kind of blend saving strategies together in order to get the most cost reduction.
Matt, can you give me a scenario where you think somebody might want to use a savings plan instead of a reserved instance?
So if you've got dynamic but consistent workloads that span multiple regions, that might span different virtual machine family types, you could use a savings plan to ultimately save money similar to that, but not equivalent to a reserved instance, but without having to go through the rigmarole of choosing a region, choosing a VM SKU, performing exchanges, purchasing new RIs. There can be a little bit of labor that comes with reserved instances. They're great. But if you have a workload that kind of fits categorically into what I just described, the savings plan gives you a good discount for your commitment in return without having to manage kind of some of the elements that I just described with a reserved instance.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
And it looks like it's pretty straightforward to actually create a savings plan. I can see
that's right.
it's done. You can do it right through the portal.
Yep.
I don't have a savings plan, of course, but I see there's a nice little purchase now button.
Yep.
Click that, and it takes you right into
Yeah.
effectively this interface that allows you to kind of pick and choose a la carte. It looks like
Right.
some.
Give it a
small
name,
thing.
choose a subscription that you want to be billed for the savings plan, choose a scope, and then you can see we've got a term length of 1 or 3 years, and then how much would you like to commit towards the savings plan?
Awesome.
5, 10, 50, 100, $200 a month. That's a number that actually this workflow will advise you on. So if a savings plan is a good fit for you, it will actually make a suggestion in that cost field is in terms of what it suggests that you do, or Azure Advisor.
I was going to say, so
provide you with some recommendations
exactly.
to apply a cost savings plan. And then that's it. Execute the transaction and away you go. You'll start saving money. Now you can pay for everything up front. So
Okay.
if you commit to a year or 3 years, you can pay for everything now. Maybe that's important if you're like doing capital type.
CapEx
purchasing,
versus
you've got a
OpEx.
budget.
Yeah,
Yeah. Or you can pay for it month to month without having any penalty for doing so. So
That's
lots
awesome.
of flexibility. It's really a great way to save money and another path to reduce your infrastructure spend in Azure.
So this is very complementary to how we think about Azure in regards to, I like to think about it as composable parts, right?
Mhm.
But it's not just about the technology. It's not just about the infrastructure. It's not just about the services. It's a composable cost structure, saving structure that you can put together to really get the biggest benefit, the biggest bang for your buck, if you will.
Right.
So it follows in that same spirit, which is fantastic. That's awesome. So yeah, it looks like to get started, if you're interested, you can literally go into the portal, and you can see I typed in savings plans here, and it took me right to the interface. And then, of course, if you want to complement that with Azure Advisor, same thing. You can type in Advisor here, and it'll go right to that interface as well. Awesome. Yeah, that is again, I love.
Who doesn't like saving money?
Amen. Amen. Because Chris, we have the holidays coming up, right? And we
Oh.
got presents to buy, and we've got people to travel to see. So who doesn't love saving money right around the
Well, I mean, that's how I'm going to buy my Christmas gift. I'm gonna save money on that.
You're gonna give everybody Azures. One Azure for you, one Azure's for you. Oh, that's awesome. Well, I just want to say it feels great to be back. Right? Absolutely. And if as a viewer, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. My email address is rickwey@microsoft.com. As you probably know by now, if you've been watching Azure Flash News. Mr. Lunzer, how can they get a hold of you?
My email is matt.lunzer@microsoft.com, or look me up on LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, LinkedIn's always a great place to connect as well. Absolutely.
You can catch me at mgarner on Twitter, or you can catch me mgarner@microsoft.com. You can email me directly.
Awesome. Very good. Excellent.
And don't forget about the Azure Flash News. Twitter
Absolutely.
handle,
Yep.
all of that.
Yep.
That'll
Yep.
keep you up to date with the latest news. It's still tweeting.
It's
all
still.
the time.
I got to double check on that. Yeah, and really important. If you do like this video, please click the like and subscribe. We love to hear from you. Comments. How we can make the show better. Now that we're getting back into a rhythm, I don't know. We're working out of the MTC, the Microsoft Technology Center office in Edina, Minnesota, and it's gone through a major overhaul. So if you haven't been here lately, you haven't been here. Let's just say that. These guys have done an amazing job in kind of giving it this facelift and really doing some cool stuff. So as we used to like to sign off, as we used to like to say, keep your fingers on the keyboards and your head in the cloud. Until next time, everybody, thanks a lot.